It was a Tuesday like any other, a day painted in the muted, familiar colors of routine. The scent of old paper and lemon polish hung in the air of the Oak Valley Public Library, a perfume that had long ago seeped into the very fabric of Elara Vance's life. She was reshelving a stack of books in the children's section, her movements a practiced, gentle rhythm, when the shrill ring of the front desk phone cut through the quiet hum. A colleague answered, her voice a low murmur, and then a shadow fell over Elara. It was Martha, her face pale, her hand trembling as she held out the receiver. "It's the school," she whispered, and in that single stark moment, the comfortable, predictable world Elara had so carefully constructed for her son, Leo, shattered into a million unrecognizable pieces. How does a life, so meticulously ordered, spiral into chaos in the space of a single heartbeat? Before that phone call, Elara Vance's life was a quiet testament to resilience. A single mother in her late 30s, she moved through the world with a grace that belied the weight she carried. Her days were a carefully choreographed dance of survival and love, beginning before the sun even thought about gracing the sky. She would wake in the pre-dawn stillness of her small apartment, the one with the perpetually dripping faucet and the view of a brick wall. And she would listen. She would listen for the soft, rhythmic breathing of her 8-year-old son, Leo, sleeping soundly in the room next to hers. That sound was her anchor, the gentle metronome that set the tempo for her entire existence. Her own dream, a half-forgotten whisper from a past life, was to write. She had once filled notebooks with stories, with characters who lived bold, adventurous lives she could only imagine. But those notebooks now gathered dust in a box under her bed, their pages filled with a language she no longer felt she had the right to speak. The demands of motherhood, of simply keeping their small boat afloat in a vast and often unforgiving ocean, had silenced that part of her. Her hardship was a quiet, constant companion. It was the anxiety that tightened her chest when she stood in the grocery aisle, calculating and recalculating the cost of food. It was the ache in her back after a long day on her feet at the library, a job she was deeply grateful for, but which paid just enough to keep them perpetually on the edge of financial worry. It was the loneliness that crept in after Leo was asleep, a profound silence that filled the small apartment and echoed with the ghosts of what might have been. Yet her love for Leo was a fierce, brilliant sun that burned away the darkest of those shadows. He was her why, the reason for every sacrifice, every early morning and late night. He was a bright, curious boy, with his father's eyes and a spirit all his own, a spirit she was determined to protect and nurture, no matter the cost. Her routine was their fortress. Breakfast together, a hurried but loving affair of toast and cereal, followed by the walk to school where she would kiss his forehead and watch until he disappeared through the big double doors. Then, it was on to the library, her sanctuary and her workplace, where she found a different kind of peace among the silent, waiting stories. She was more than just a librarian. She was a guardian of worlds, a quiet matchmaker between lonely souls and the books that could save them. The phone call was a blur. Words like accident, playground, and unresponsive swirled around Elara, refusing to form a coherent thought. She remembered dropping the books she was holding, the loud thud echoing the sudden, violent stopping of her own heart. She remembered Martha's arm around her, guiding her out of the library and into the harsh, unforgiving sunlight. The drive to the hospital was a nightmare of screeching tires and frantic prayers whispered under her breath. She ran through the sterile, white corridors, her own breathing ragged and loud in her ears, until a nurse with kind, sad eyes stopped her. Leo had fallen from the top of the jungle gym. He had a severe concussion, a broken arm, and internal injuries they were still assessing. The world tilted on its axis. Her carefully ordered life, the one she had built brick by painstaking brick, had been demolished. The days that followed were a long, agonizing vigil by Leo's hospital bed. He was small and pale against the stark white sheets, hooked up to a symphony of machines that beeped and whirred, each sound a fresh wave of terror washing over her. The doctors spoke in a language she couldn't quite comprehend, a clinical jargon of prognoses and procedures that felt a million miles away from the simple, devastating reality of her son's stillness. The financial implications began to dawn on her with a slow, creeping dread. The hospital bills were mounting at an astronomical rate, and her modest insurance plan felt like a paper shield against a tidal wave. She took an unpaid leave of absence from the library, her only source of income, and watched her meager savings dwindle with each passing day. The dripping faucet in her apartment seemed like a cruel joke, a constant reminder of the slow, steady draining of her resources. One afternoon, as she sat watching the rhythmic rise and fall of Leo's chest, a man appeared in the doorway of the hospital room. He was tall and impeccably dressed in a dark suit that seemed out of place in the sterile environment. His face was etched with concern, his dark hair slightly disheveled as if he had run his hands through it one too many times. "Excuse me," he said, his voice a low, gentle baritone. "Are you Elara Vance?" She nodded, her throat too tight to speak. "My name is Julian Croft," he said, stepping into the room. "I was at the school. I saw what happened. I'm the one who called the ambulance." Elara stared at him, a flicker of recognition in her memory. She vaguely recalled a man kneeling by Leo's side on the wood chips, his voice calm and steady as he spoke to the 911 operator. Julian's eyes fell on Leo, and a look of profound sadness crossed his features. "How is he asked softly. "The doctors, they're not sure," Elara managed to whisper, the words catching in her throat. "They say it's just a matter of time and waiting." Julian pulled up a chair, his movements slow and deliberate, as if he were afraid of disturbing the fragile peace of the room. He didn't offer empty platitudes or hollow reassurances. He just sat with her, a silent, steady presence in the overwhelming silence. He began visiting every day. He would bring her coffee, a sandwich she hadn't realized she was hungry for, or sometimes just a newspaper. They spoke in hushed tones, their conversations a lifeline in the suffocating atmosphere of the hospital. She learned that he was a writer, a successful novelist who had recently moved to Oak Valley to escape the noise of the city. He was working on a new book and had been visiting the school to do research for a character. A strange, ironic twist of fate that wasn't lost on Elara. "A writer," she had said one day, a ghost of a smile touching her lips. "I used to want to be a writer." "What did you write?" Julian asked, his curiosity genuine. "Just stories," she deflected, the old shame and regret bubbling up. "Silly things, a lifetime ago." But Julian was persistent. He gently coaxed the stories out of her, listening with an intensity that made her feel seen in a way she hadn't in years. He spoke of her old dream not as a forgotten relic, but as a living, breathing thing that was just waiting to be rediscovered. He saw the writer in her, the storyteller who had been silenced but not extinguished. As the weeks wore on, a tentative friendship bloomed between them, a fragile green shoot in the barren landscape of her fear and anxiety. Julian's presence became a source of comfort, a small island of stability in the turbulent sea of her life. He made her laugh, a sound she thought she had forgotten how to make. He listened to her fears without judgment, his quiet strength a balm to her frayed nerves. But beneath the surface of their growing connection, a new tension was building. The hospital's billing department began calling, their voices polite but firm. The eviction notice arrived, a stark white piece of paper taped to her apartment door that felt like a final, crushing blow. She was drowning, and the weight of it all was becoming too much to bear. She tried to hide it from Julian, to maintain a facade of control, but he saw the cracks in her armor. He saw the way her hands trembled when she thought he wasn't looking, the dark circles under her eyes that spoke of sleepless nights spent wrestling with a terror she couldn't name. The conflict came to a head one rainy afternoon. A hospital administrator, a stern woman named Mrs. Gable, had cornered Elara in the hallway, her tone clipped and unsympathetic as she laid out the stark reality of the situation. The insurance had denied a significant portion of the claim, and Elara was now responsible for a sum of money that was so large it seemed like a number from a different universe. She was standing by the window, staring out at the rain-streaked glass, when Julian found her. The carefully constructed walls she had built around her heart finally crumbled. The tears came, hot and silent at first, and then a racking sob that shook her entire body. "I can't do this," she choked out, the words a raw, ragged admission of defeat. "I'm going to lose everything. My home, my job. I'm going to fail him." Julian didn't say anything. He simply wrapped his arms around her, holding her as she wept, his embrace a safe harbor in the storm. He let her cry until the tears subsided, until all that was left was a deep, shuddering exhaustion. "You are not going to fail him," he said, his voice firm and unwavering. "You are the strongest person I have ever met, Elara, and you are not alone in this." He told her he had an idea, a plan. It was unconventional, and it would require a leap of faith, but he believed it could work. He wanted to help her, not out of pity, but out of a deep and abiding respect for the woman he had come to know. He saw her not as a victim, but as a hero, a warrior who was fighting the battle of her life for the person she loved most in the world. The choice was hers, but he was offering her a hand to hold as she walked through the fire. The climax of Elara's story didn't happen in a grand, dramatic fashion. It unfolded quietly, in the sterile, hushed environment of the hospital room, under the fluorescent lights that had borne witness to her deepest fears. Julian had been gone for 2 days, his absence a palpable void. He had simply said he was taking care of something and would be back. Elara, lost in the fog of her anxiety, had barely registered his departure. She was sitting by Leo's bed, holding his small, unmoving hand, when he finally woke up. It wasn't a sudden, movie-like gasp for air. It was a slow, gentle flutter of his eyelids, a soft groan, And then his eyes, those beautiful, familiar eyes, focused on her face. "Mom?" he whispered, his voice hoarse and weak. Elara's breath caught in her throat. A wave of relief so powerful it almost brought her to her knees washed over her. She squeezed his hand, tears of joy streaming down her face. "I'm here, baby," she sobbed. "I'm right here." The doctors were cautiously optimistic. Leo was weak, and his recovery would be a long, slow road, but he was awake. The fog had lifted. For the first time in weeks, Elara felt a flicker of hope, a tiny, fragile flame in the darkness. It was later that evening that Julian returned. He walked into the room to find Elara reading to a drowsy but alert Leo. The sight of them together, the soft cadence of her voice filling the small space, made him pause in the doorway. He was holding a large, official-looking envelope. "He's awake," Elara said, her smile radiant, transforming her tired face into something breathtakingly beautiful. "Julian, he's awake." Julian's own smile was wide and genuine. He walked over to the bed, his eyes soft as he looked at Leo. "Hey, champ," he said gently. "Good to have you back." After Leo had drifted off to sleep, Julian handed Elara the envelope. "What's this?" she asked, her brow furrow, in confusion. "Open it," he urged, his expression unreadable. Her hands trembled as she broke the seal. Inside was a series of documents, a dizzying array of legal and financial papers. She saw the hospital's letterhead, figures that made her head spin, and then, at the bottom of the main page, a stamp, paid in full. She looked up at Julian, her eyes wide with disbelief. "I don't understand," she whispered. "How?" Julian took a deep breath. "I sold the movie rights to my last novel," he said simply. "The advance was substantial, more than enough to cover everything." Elara stared at him, speechless. The magnitude of his gesture was overwhelming. It was a kindness so profound, so unexpected, that she couldn't process it. "Why?" she finally managed to ask, her voice barely a whisper. "Why would you do that for me?" Julian reached out and took her hand, his thumb gently stroking her knuckles. "A few weeks ago," he began, his voice low and earnest, "you told me about your dream of being a writer. You talked about the stories you wanted to tell, the worlds you wanted to create, and then you said you had to give it all up, that you had to choose between your dream and your son." He paused, his gaze unwavering. "I don't believe you have to make that choice, Elara. I believe you deserve to have both. You are an incredible mother, and you are a gifted storyteller. The world needs to hear your voice." He then pulled out another document from the envelope. It was a contract, a publishing contract, with her name on it. "My agent read the pages you showed me," he explained. "She was blown away. She sent them to an editor at a major publishing house. They want to offer you a 2-book deal, Elara. They want to publish your stories." The room fell silent, the only sound the steady, rhythmic beep of the heart monitor. Elara looked from the paid hospital bills to the publishing contract, and then back to the face of the man who had, in the space of a few short weeks, completely upended her world. It wasn't just about the money. It wasn't even just about the book deal. It was about being seen. Julian had looked past the struggling single mother, the tired librarian, and had seen the woman she had forgotten she could be. He had not only saved her from financial ruin, but he had also given her back a part of herself she thought was lost forever. The reward wasn't the absence of debt. It was the presence of a future she had never dared to imagine. In that quiet hospital room, under the watchful eyes of the beeping machines, Elara Vance was reborn. The tears that fell this time were not tears of sorrow or fear, but of a profound, overwhelming gratitude. She had been given a second chance, a gift of grace from the most unexpected of sources. And as she looked at Julian, she realized that the story she most wanted to write was the one that was just beginning. The weeks that followed Leo's awakening were a slow, gentle unfolding into a new reality. The transition from the sterile, anxious world of the hospital to the familiar comfort of their own apartment was a journey in itself. Julian had arranged for a cleaning service to come in while they were gone, and they returned to a home that was sparkling and fresh, the perpetually dripping faucet finally silenced. The air, once thick with the scent of worry, now smelled of lemon and possibility. Leo's recovery was a testament to the resilience of childhood. His broken arm, encased in a bright blue cast that he quickly covered in doodles and the signatures of friends, became a badge of honor. He was still weak, and there were regular appointments with physical therapists and specialists, but the light had returned to his eyes. His laughter, once a sound Elara feared she might never hear again, now filled the small apartment, chasing away the last of the lingering shadows. The dynamic between the three of them settled into a comfortable, easy rhythm. Julian was a constant, steady presence, no longer just a visitor but an integral part of their lives. He would help Leo with his homework, his patience endless as he explained long division and the life cycle of a frog. He would cook dinner, filling their small kitchen with the aromas of garlic and basil, his culinary skills far exceeding Elara's own repertoire of simple, budget-friendly meals. They would eat together at their small kitchen table, their conversations a mix of the mundane and the profound. They talked about Leo's day at school, about the characters in Julian's new novel, about the stories Elara was beginning to write. In these quiet, ordinary moments, a new kind of family was being forged, one built not on obligation or biology, but on a foundation of shared experience, mutual respect, and a deep, unspoken affection. Elara's own transformation was a quiet, internal blossoming. The weight that had settled so heavily on her shoulders for years had begun to lift. She started sleeping through the night, her dreams no longer haunted by financial anxieties. She found herself smiling more, a genuine, unforced smile that reached her eyes. The publishing contract lay on her desk, a tangible symbol of her new reality. At first she was intimidated by it, the blank pages of her notebook, a terrifying expanse of white. The voice of self-doubt, her old, familiar companion, whispered that she wasn't good enough, that it was all a fluke, a product of Julian's charity. But Julian, with his quiet, unwavering belief in her, helped her silence that voice. "Just write one sentence," he would tell her, sitting beside her at the kitchen table, his own laptop open. And then another. "The story is already inside you, Elara. You just have to let it out." And so, she began to write. The words came slowly at first, a hesitant trickle, and then a steady flow. She wrote in the early mornings before Leo woke up, the same pre-dawn stillness that had once been filled with anxiety, now a sacred space for creation. She wrote about a woman who finds her voice, about a love that heals, about the quiet, everyday heroism of motherhood. Her own life, her own struggles and triumphs bled onto the page, transformed into a story that was both deeply personal and universally resonant. Her relationship with Julian deepened, evolving from friendship into something more. It was a slow, gentle courtship, marked by shared glances over the dinner table, lingering touches, and conversations that stretched late into the night. There was no grand, dramatic declaration of love, but rather a quiet, mutual understanding that grew between them. One evening, as they were cleaning up after dinner, their hands brushed as they both reached for the same plate. The simple, accidental contact sent a jolt of electricity through Elara. Julian paused, his eyes searching hers. He slowly, deliberately, took her hand in his fingers lacing through hers. "Elara," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. He didn't need to say anything more. In his eyes, she saw a reflection of her own feelings, a love that was as steady and as certain as the rising sun. She leaned in and kissed him, a soft, tentative kiss that was filled with all the unspoken words, all the shared moments, all the gratitude and affection that had been building between them for months. It was a kiss that tasted of hope, of second chances, of a love she had long ago stopped believing she deserved. A year later, the world was a different place. Or perhaps, the world was the same. But Elara Vance was seeing it through new eyes. The small apartment was still their home, but it no longer felt like a cage. It was a sanctuary, a place filled with laughter, the smell of Julian's cooking, and the happy clutter of a growing boy's life. Leo, fully recovered, was a whirlwind of energy and joy, his blue cast a distant memory. Elara's first novel, The Librarian Song, had been published 6 months earlier. It had been met with critical acclaim and had found a devoted readership, its story of resilience and quiet strength resonating with people from all walks of life. The advance had allowed her to finally quit her job at the library, not with regret, but with a sense of gratitude for the sanctuary it had provided for so many years. She was now a full-time writer, a title she still wore with a sense of wonder and disbelief. She and Julian had built a life together, a partnership of equals. They wrote side by side at the kitchen table, their keyboards clicking in a comfortable rhythm, their creative energies feeding off each other. He was her first reader, her biggest champion, and her most honest critic. She, in turn, had become an indispensable part of his process, her insights and instincts helping to shape his own characters and narratives. The romance that had blossomed between them was not a fairy tale of grand gestures and dramatic pronouncements. It was a quiet, steady love, built on a foundation of mutual respect and deep understanding. It was in the way he brought her coffee just the way she liked it when she was on a deadline. It was in the way she would read a passage of his work and know exactly what he was trying to say. It was in the easy, comfortable silence that could fall between them. A silence that was not empty, but full of a shared history and a shared future. The story concludes not with a wedding or a dramatic life event, but on a simple, ordinary Tuesday morning. Elara is in the kitchen, the early morning sun aiming through the window, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. The scent of coffee and toast hangs in the air. Leo is at the table, chattering excitedly about a school project, while Julian reads the morning paper, his hand resting comfortably on Elara's shoulder. She looks at the scene before her, this beautiful, ordinary moment, and a wave of profound peace washes over her. Her life was not perfect, and it was not without its challenges, but it was a life she had built, a life she had chosen, a life filled with a love so deep and so real, it felt like the very air she breathed. Sometimes, the greatest transformations are not the loud, earth-shattering events, but the quiet, internal shifts that change the way we see the world. It is not always about finding a new life, but about rediscovering the one that has been waiting for you all along. For Elara, happiness was not the absence of struggle, but the presence of love. It was the realization that a broken heart can heal, that a silenced voice can learn to sing again, and that even in the most ordinary of lives, there is the potential for extraordinary grace. It was the quiet truth that the most beautiful stories are not the ones we read in books, but the ones we are brave enough to live.